Hegel, among many accomplishments, is largely more obscured by his successors in the wake of modern political philosophy of the 19th century. It is not that he lacked any major framework. He certainly did lay a great foundation, but, if his name be mentioned at all in politics, it is beside the 20th century giant which is Marx, or more broadly the young Hegelians. I won't go any further on the young Hegelians, other than to lightly motion at them as a primary political marker on history that we may think of if we ever pair Hegel in politics and common discourse. So, if Marx turned Hegel's dialectic right side up, it really begs the question of how Hegel was handled by the right wing, that is, the other end of the spectrum to Marx. Reasonably enough, we must first begin with understanding what the left and right wing even are, for if we simply throw these terms around without understanding them, we will really get nowhere. The left wing is easy enough to define for our purposes, as we will generally line it up with a revolutionary fervor of the French Revolution, a tossing aside of the order of things. It is essential to the left wing that class distinctions be tossed out, in other words, capitalism, just as the French had properly disposed of feudalism. In fact, the seedlings of anarchist and socialist thought were beginning to form here. So if this was the left wing then, we can see the right wing as the reactionary, those who sought to try to maintain an old order of things. However, as time went on, the right took on a more quasi-revolutionary nature, which, as we will see, are borrowed from Hegel's historicism of dynamism, as it heralded ideas previously known within the left wing, like nationalism and the like, which will be central to our genealogy. It is here where we land at a very, extremely broad outline of the two ends. So, if Hegel was, as we know, a man who had a nuanced relationship with the French revolutionary fervor, praising its heralding of reason and seeing it as a larger revealing of the idea, which, similar to Marx's teleology, was central to his ideas of his reason, then how was he in any way appealing to the reactionary and somewhat anti-revolutionary philosopher? For this, we begin with Taine. Taine, for all his greatness, had one primary motivating flaw which contributed to his later obscurity. From Taine we can see the earliest forms of modern anti-French revolutionary thought. In The French Right, J.S. McClellan introduces Taine briefly. Taine is on the edge. He is an irrationalist, but not an anti-rationalist. He recognizes the value of reason, but also sees its limitations. Now hold on to this little epitaph as we turn to Hegel. Hegel veered from the sense of reason and man found in the Revolution. He focused heavily on history. Broadly, he considered all human activity to be the sum of history, or defined by their history. As such, to understand the character of a people, you must understand and acknowledge its history. This is the first break from the French left radicalist view of people as a sum of their interactions. In this manner, Hegel had already begun a theory of societies which was based on its history, rejecting an idea of a blank slate individualist or tabula rasa atomistic theory of person. To Hegel, his reason was something grasped by a continuation of history and becoming, not by individuals. The primary point of his philosophy of history was, however, its tendency toward a teleology based upon the Geist, which guided toward a process of the idea, his reason, revealing itself through the process. To Hegel, the guiding force, Geist, served to move the revelation of the idea through the becoming. In Hegel's lectures on the philosophy of history, delivered in the University of Berlin, he states, "It is our belief that reason governs the world, and has consequently governed its history." Thus, we turn back to Taine and his hostility toward rationality. Taine's hostility toward reason drew him to a distinction of two reasons, which he called the raison raisonnante and the raison qui s'ignore. The first reason is our most familiar reason, that which operates according to logic and seeks to be as refined as mathematical models. The second, however, is not reason at all in the way we understand. McClellan again offers us a valuable insight into its nature. The raison qui s'ignore is not reason at all in the first sense, at least not in Taine or Burke. It refers to wisdom, the accumulated wisdom of the ages which is slowly deposited in institutions. The philosopher has access to it, But the method of access differs from the method used in the first kind of reasoning, in that it does not involve deduction from premises, but an empathetic research into history, geography, literature, and myth. The forces with which the philosopher may have to deal with, if he is to find out what it is, may be unconscious. This bears a striking resemblance to our Hegelian philosophy of history. His raison qui s'ignore appears to be quite similar to Hegel's understanding of the idea. Taine's relationship to Hegel is of no surprise, as he, very early on, showed an attraction towards Hegel's metaphysics. He only disdained its approach to rationalism. In Maurice Barrés's novel, Les Déracines, a major theme permeates the entirety. To Barrés, there is no self-deduced system of relationships like morality or the state or society. There is no conscious rationality which arrives at these, like Taine's raison raisonnante. To Barrés, such is absurd. For him, these are the result of a certain kind of determinism, which he labels nationalism. And to him, nationalism is the raison qui s'ignore, or more precisely, the myth of nationalism, which I'll return to. Barrés's determinism, guided by his formulation of the raison qui s'ignore, arrives at how the history of a nation informs its present circumstances. Barrés then gives us the very radical notion that all systems can be only properly found in the history of a people, and not be self-deduced through some logic or rationality, as the French revolutionaries attempted when they organized a state and society. Back to understanding this new conception of the idea and the Geist and such, we ask, what exactly is it in this new framework? With and to what does it lead, if not Hegel's idea in its precise sense? We return to Marx. I made the earlier rather controversial connection that Marx's assertion that communism is a logical unfolding of the contradictions of capitalism, and thus that the contradictions of capitalism are explained through their roles in the advent of communism, is a teleology similar to that of Hegel's and Hegel's Geist. Though admittedly dubious, in Marx and Teleology by Sean Sayer, he notes, according to Althusser, these Hegelian formulae and Marxist humanism are unavoidably teleological. There are cases of what Althusser calls the philosophy of origin and end, for they presume the notion of a subject present at the outset and continuing throughout, which embodies the end. The process of development is then the realization of an end that has been operative in the subject from the beginning. The purpose of this comparison is that it will explain how Sorel, by reorienting this notion of the subject, was driven to his myth. Sorel, a Marxist, or at least intimately aligned with Marxism, felt that the myth was a force which drove history forward, while itself being revealed in the process of history. Sorel is specific in his advocacy of myth, but in Maurice and Barrés there is an implied use of myth. For Barrés, the real France of the provincial graveyards is a mythology. It may not have existed in the past, but it points the way to action in the present. In this way, Hegel's conception of societies as entities which were defined by their histories, larger than the individual reactions which made it up, and who partook in a teleological relationship with some metaphysical Geist and the idea, was foundational in the romantic nationalism of the Action Française and broader far-right thinking. Barrés, in his work From Hegel to the Canteens of the North, in Chapter 1, offers a pretty succinct and strong support for a genealogy of Hegel in this regard. It is well known that according to Hegel's admirable dialectic, the idea cannot be manifested in a particular fact or individual. The idea is immanent only in a succession of phenomena moving towards the infinite. We now know how to follow the historical development of the nation. We now understand what has gone before, and more, we respect that development, and that the truth of a thing consists in its place in the total scheme of things. For Barrés, who we will label a proto-fascist, he is that primary fountain of intellect for which the fascist gets his intoxicated romantic sense of nationalism, and this revolutionary idea of the nation, which truly is mere myth. It does not matter if such a France or Germany ever existed, only that it exists in myth and in the people. You'll commonly hear fascists and fascist rhetoric follow with an idea of revitalizing the nation. Usually it comes with a deeply nostalgic sense for that old, ancient great nation. Such a thing does not exist, but is what guides forth. Such ideas of palingenesis are very well documented by historians of fascism. Barrés writes for us in his Scenes and Doctrines of Nationalism, connecting his nation to Hegel's idea. Our thoughts are not the products of our own individual intelligence. They are the physiological translations of primeval physiological dispositions. By this he means that the thoughts of the nation are themselves, through the process of history, the primeval nation revealing itself in history, in the creation of the nation, and in the creation of the people. The truth of nation consists in its place in the total scheme of the development of the nation, immanent in the succession of history and informing its development. Again, the nation is the idea, and its Geist, its consciousness and force. Integral to the right wing was the preservation of the nation, which, in practicality, was the status quo, or what it was mythicized to be. Hegel's preface to the philosophy of the right was integral in this rationale. What is rational is real, and what is real is rational. This is expressed in subtlety by Barres's notion of the raison qui s'ignore in the real ancestors, the dead. After the long, hard work of foraging, after a subtle and profound search, I found the gushing source in my little garden. Thus it seems to me that the individual is bound to all his dead ancestors by the efforts and sacrifices of individuals in the past. We focus a great deal on Barres, and this is for good reason. Barres takes Hegel and plants us into a nationalism and sense of history which follows by the nation into the nation. Barres's sensibilities were no obscure ideas to the French nationalists of the 20th century, and he was a strong ideological undercurrent of his contemporary thinkers, such as Charles Maurras, who later would be a significant figure in the Nouvelle Droite. The Nouvelle Droite would become the fountain source of all the far right since then, and its ideology survives and thrives in the fringes of radicalism on the right. Though Hegel as a source of ideology is no longer praised nor considered, Hegel was integral to the development of the very particular doctrines of the far right and fascism. I will finish off with Barres's notes on philosophy. He could not have directed or annulled the conclusions of the arguments which he invented. A principle is often destined for a mysterious future.